I'll take a stab at that, Russ, to start us out. Um, you know, there's several different ways you can start that conversation. And so I have one family right now, and they're designing a family meeting just around full retreat format, just around the conversation about what did we do? What do we have? And then what do we want our desired future story to be, right? So I, as the rising generation, next generation, can go to my parents or grandparents and say, they've done probably legal, structural, constitutional kind of work to ensure that there's a future available relative to the different types of wealth they've built up, not just financial, but all types of wealth: financial, social, human, intellectual, time, their own legacy, etc. So there is that condition of sorry about the dog barking. There is that condition of legitimacy that comes out when you go through the will, you go through the legal documents. But there's also that sense of mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles. You did something to take what you had and bring us into the present so that we also have. And you want me, as the rising generation, to migrate towards that desired future story. And you might want to ask, how might I make a contribution in your mind, mom and dad, grandma and grandpa? How might I make a contribution to that desired future story? And how might that story find room for me to be a part of it? Because if I don't see myself in that story, the part that's desired and future doesn't happen, right? It becomes history, because migrating to the future doesn't quite work out. And so you don't want to have that conversation in a controversial way, but being able to go and say, you've designed a vision for the future. And I think you've designed me as part of that vision for the future. And so let's talk about how I make a contribution and how me, myself, and I fit into that desired future story in a legitimate way, without losing who I am and without feeling bound, because this is a big issue in family enterprise, is people feel bound by the designs of the future, the legal structures, right? And that's often why trust instruments are so controversial in the emotions of family, is they feel bound. And so that's one way Jeff, have seen that, having that conversation. I've also seen where there's a struggle in the senior generations where they say, what do you mean you want to be legitimate? I'm handing you all these gifts. I'm making your future so easy for you. But legitimacy is an emotion as much as it is a legal authority. Legitimacy, the value of legitimacy, the condition of legitimacy is really the fuel that enables the future. And that is what parents and grandparents want, is to be able to enable the future. Even if they're the controlling type that says, I'm going to control from the grave here, there are ways to have conversations around that to say, how might I fit, and how might your vision fit into my own journey? And then how do we take some of the gray area that we're not so sure about, the collective area, and design it in a way that we all fit in a way that does enable that future. Russ, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can add a story that basically highlights that. It's a rising gen reached out, and they and their family had been working for many years on creating a succession or continuity transition plan that allowed the continuity of the business, but for the founder to be able to step away and follow other pursuits, albeit with some involvement in the business, as is often the case with the way in which succession plans are drafted. And something didn't feel right. And the rising gen that I was speaking with couldn't articulate what it was that didn't feel right. And so he basically said, could we have a coffee? And so about 3 or 4 coffees later, and kind of a long conversation about the way in which the plan had been drafted, and that it had been led by very well-meaning and very proficient professionals, but that it lacked something. And now looking back, I can see that it lacked legitimacy. He couldn't see himself in the future that was being created. And I used a kind of a visual metaphor with him to ask him, is this how you feel? And I asked him, do you feel as if you're being asked to step into a bird cage? And basically that's where you then need to exist. And he said, yes, exactly it. I can see the world outside, which is where I really want to be, but I'm going to be in this bird cage of a transition and succession plan that I just can't see myself living well within. And so having put his finger on the fact that it didn't allow him to gain what he perceived as his legitimacy, it was something that was kind of preordained. From an external perspective, it would look successful because I've taken on the role of chief executive managing director of this business, and I'm continuing the legacy and the work that's been done by my forefathers, but it just lacked that sense of legitimacy and for him to have agency and ownership of his own life, which then allowed us to go back and go, okay, what does it need to look like in order for that to be the case? So it's something that's often, the previous webinar we did, we talked about it as kind of this invisible barrier. And it's something that through utilizing the research and the language that we're putting out into the world is much better able for advisors and families alike to go, where's the legitimacy in this plan? Which I think is an important and powerful conversation to have.
You know, you remind me of a story, Russ, of a family that's really, you know, that their commitment is to enabling the future and engaging the rising generation, many, many generations old family. And one of the family members said it's almost like a conflicting commitment, because to me, Dad, it's feeling like you're prescribing who I need to be in this desired future story. And it's not really much of who I really am. And then that family member creates that division through resistance, right? We all have so much resistance, and that creates a informal and temporary force of power, but it is a form of power, right? It's a negative force of power, that resistance. By you denying me a sense of legitimacy, I'm denying your plan a sense of legitimacy, especially because the parent wants family harmony to be part of the desired future story, fiercely wants family harmony to be part of that because of industry-wide lore of how horrible the dynamic has been in other families in that enterprise industry. And so by denying the legitimacy, he is actually, the parent is actually creating that invisible barrier, strengthening it, and is also creating that division that is putting the question of, can we have a shared future together? Because of that power. Now, on the flip side, I also have a family to how the next gen worked with the senior gen, because it wasn't the founding gen, but the senior gen. The senior gen set up a development and education fund, separate from college education, separate from skill development type of education. But the development fund, every family member has to pursue something that furthers their understanding of themselves. And they have to do it on an annual basis. And it can be a major immersion retreat, like a Hoffman Institute. If you know about that, it's go for a week and immerse yourself in a family. It can be a week immersion retreat, like a Quest. Or it can be a course at a university, but it has to be it has to be an initiative to better understand yourself. And they come back on an annual retreat basis to revise their family purpose, meaning, and vision, to tweak it, to make sure that it is aligned with the current sense of identity that everybody has. So everybody sees themselves in a very large family. Everybody sees themselves in this story. So that's one practice that you all may think about as a fund, a quest fund. I'm not just saying quest because the quest of legitimacy, but the quest for a sense of self in a way that everybody knows this is my duty and responsibility to be able to really quest for myself so that I can make it clear to you how I feel legitimate in my own life and how I'd like for you and I to interact, for you and me to interact as we move forward. So that's my addition to that.